Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 5 of the fantasy football season. It's important to note that the Lions, Chargers, Eagles, and Titans are on bye, so you will have no Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Lad McConkey, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Calvin Ridley. But we're going to help you fill that lineup with this video. We're going to talk about every single matchup in week number 5. All right, let's start off with a Thursday night football game, divisional matchup, the Bucs at the Falcons, 43.5 point over under. The Falcons are favored at home. As far as the Bucs side of the ball goes, Falcons are kind of a middle of the pack matchup, but you've got two fantasy superstars here in Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Mike Evans, my start of the week last week, and he went off 94 yards, a touchdown, got back on track. I believe both of these guys are playable every single week. Baker Mayfield is literally playing his best football I think we've ever seen him play in the NFL. And Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, both playing at an elite level, both top 10 wide receivers in my rankings here in week number 5. As far as Drake London goes, he is getting more and more targets. In fact, if you look from week 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, his targets have gone up in every single game from 3 to 7 to 9 to 12 targets last week versus the New Orleans Saints. Now he faces the Bucs, and unfortunately for Kyle Pitts owners, it's like Drake London is like the guy for this offense. I think Darnell Mooney is like a startable name if you're dealing with a lot of injuries, if you have a lot of players on bye. You know, we've seen him average around 7 targets per game in the last 3 weeks, so he's definitely a viable option if you need a player on a desperation type of play. All right, the international games are starting here in week number 5. North London, Tottenham Spurs Stadium. That was a terrible accent. I'll never do that again. I'm sorry. 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time is when this game starts. Make sure you set your lineups early. We've got the Jets at the Vikings, 41.5 point over under. If Garrett Wilson doesn't go off this game, we're going to have a huge conversation about his future, okay? Last week, you guys know this. I do my bust videos every week, guys that could bust your team. And Garrett Wilson was on that list because he was facing Pat Surtain, a very difficult defense in Denver that doesn't give up many fantasy points to wide receivers. He gets held to his season low 7 fantasy points. This is the week for Garrett Wilson to break out. This is the week for Garrett Wilson to show us that he is a true superstar in the NFL. No longer this talk about how talented he is. You know, could he be the next Davante Adams for Aaron Rodgers? And he was a 5-star recruit, first-round draft pick. It doesn't matter anymore. Put up or shut up now versus the Minnesota Vikings, who give up the 4th most points to fantasy wide receivers right now. It is your time to shine. Otherwise, I'm hitting the panic button on you, brother. I really am. Now, on the Vikings side of the ball, it was great to have Jordan Addison back. He comes back, has 4 targets, but ends up with 2 touchdowns, almost 23 fantasy points. I think his role will just continue to grow over the season. I'm going to label him a spot start. You can definitely start him if you need to. My wide receiver 32 in my rankings, but this is a very difficult defense to go up against with DJ Reed on one side. On the other side, you've obviously got Sauce Gardner. Now, you can't sit Justin Jefferson. We all know that, but man, this is a very big test for this offense, a big test for Sam Darnold facing an incredible secondary. Let's see if they can overcome it, but of course, Jefferson's going to be in your lineups. All right. This brings us to the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games on Sunday. We've got the Panthers at the Bears, the Bryce Young, Caleb Williams trade game. You know, this is like these two franchises now get to butt heads on the actual field. 42.5 point over under. Chicago is favored at home coming off a win. DJ Moore is a must start for me. I think he's a fine play. He's the most consistent name, you could say. He hasn't had like this upside. I mean, he scored a touchdown last week and finished with 11 fantasy points, but still, he's definitely someone that you can come out and start versus the Panthers, who are a top 15 matchup for fantasy wide receivers. You'd love to see a higher ceiling for him, but he's definitely a good floor play at this point. Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen, very confusing right now. I am going to start Rome Odunze between those two names if I had to choose, because Keenan Allen has already started losing snaps in 2 wide receiver sets. We're seeing more and more Rome Odunze on the field. I believe that will lead to more and more targets. Now, as far as the Panthers go, this is so exciting. If you own Deontay Johnson like myself in the Flock League, he was a my guy for me this year. It looked so dreadful. And then out of nowhere, Andy Dalton completely revives his season. So excited to play Deontay Johnson as long as Andy Dalton is a starter. A top 12 play for me here in week number 5. Cannot wait to play Deontay Johnson everywhere I have him. Xavier Legette is also a fine option. He had 10 targets. He also had 2 carries last week, 12 opportunities. They're trying to use him in creative ways, use him down the field. Unfortunately, he made some silly drops, but he is a rookie, and it's very impressive to see a rookie already get 10 targets, play almost 90% of the snaps with no Adam Thielen. So I definitely think he's in play as a spot start this week. All right. Number 4 matchup this week, the Ravens at the Bengals, an AFC North showdown. We've got an over-under of 48.5, which is the second highest of the week. So Vegas believes we'll see some fantasy cheese in this matchup right here. The Ravens are favored, even though they are going to Cincinnati. Let's start with the Bengals. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, definitely both must-starts in my book. Jamar Chase, averaging around 25 points per game in the last 2 weeks. He's definitely picked it up with Joe Burrow. He's back to superstar status. And then T. Higgins is getting consistently targeted. The good games will come. Last week, 10 targets, only turned out to be 12 fantasy points, but he's clearly the number 2. We don't need to worry about Andre Yeshivas moving forward. And then as far as the Ravens go, man, so confusing. Really, really confusing. Only 2 targets, but here's the reason for optimism. Number 1, they did not need to throw the ball at all. Like, they dominated Buffalo from start to finish. Derrick Henry went off. They were dominant the entire game. So that's the case to be made as to why they didn't need Zay Flowers. But I definitely think we have to be a little bit concerned about his weekly ceiling. He is kind of like this boom bust player. He can win you your week, and he can certainly lose you your week. We are already seeing that play out. I mean, the first 2 weeks, great. The last 2 weeks, not so good. So definitely someone who's like in that boom bust category. But this is a matchup, again, second highest over under the week. We should see a competitive game, a divisional, rivals. I'm excited to start Zay Flowers in this one. All right, let's talk Bills at Texans. 46.5 point over under. The Texans are favored. And let's start with them. The Bills are a difficult defense for your fantasy wide receivers. In fact, this is the second worst matchup for fantasy wide receivers. But Nico Collins is the definition of a superstar. The wide receiver 2 so far through 5 weeks, the 7th overall player in fantasy scoring. The dude has been an absolute superstar. He's on track for almost 2,000 receiving yards. The guy's just made of different gravy. And if you bought in on Nico Collins, you've got to take your victory lap at this point. Also, Stephon Diggs, absolutely in play. The wide receiver 7 on the year. He has had 3 incredible weeks and 1 down week. We have to be aware that with Stephon Diggs, at any point he could bust. But man, he's getting consistent targets. He's definitely finding an incredible role with CJ Stroud. Now, Tank Dell is also planning to be back. They expect him to return for week number 5. So he's going to go in that spot start category. He's a definition of boom bust. There's been so many plays this year where if he just made the catch, or if the throw was more accurate, or if this or that, he would have scored a touchdown. This could be the week that all changes. It totally could. But you have to recognize he's a boom bust player. And right now he is 3rd on the pecking, order for this wide receiver room. Now, as far as the Bills go, this team is super confusing because last week was one of the first weeks we saw them down, and we thought, hey, maybe they will heavily target guys like Khalil Shakir. Khalil Shakir comes out and has 5 targets. I mean, that's the kind of targets he gets in a game where they dominate. I don't understand exactly how they're deploying these wide receivers. But if you have to play a Bills wide receiver, it would be Khalil Shakir for me. He has been the most consistent. He hasn't had a single game under 10 PPR fantasy points, whereas names like Keon Coleman are the definition of boom bust. Curtis Samuel is unplayable. So I definitely think you can start Shakir. He's a startable name. All right, let's move on to the Colts at the Jags. This is a divisional matchup, and this is going to take a lot of context. So let's dive into this, all right? Firstly, the Jags are favored at home. What is FanDuel doing here? I don't know. Okay, the Jags are favored. I know they've got their throwback uniforms they're rocking, and those are really crispy. Is it just based off of aura, or we give them extra points because of aura? I don't know. Interesting. But let's talk about the Jags. Brian Thomas looks like an absolute superstar, guys. He's averaging 9 targets per game over the last 2 games, and he had his best ever career game in week 4 versus the Houston Texans. 6 catches, 86 yards, a touchdown. He could have had another touchdown if Trevor Lawrence didn't miss him on the left side of the field in the end zone. He was pretty much wide open, but Trevor overthrew him. But he is a crucial, pivotal part of this offense, and his role is just going to keep getting better and better and better. And the great news for Christian Kirk owners is he's averaging 11 targets per game in the last 2 weeks. He looks like he's finally hit, his foot on the gas pedal. They realize, hey, we should utilize Christian Kirk, the guy we've been using for the last, 2-3 years, an important part of our offense. So he's back, he's being utilized, and in PPR formats, he's going to have a safe floor. Now, let's talk about the Colts, because we got to play out 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is Anthony Richardson is playing. If Anthony Richardson is playing, I do not want a single part of any wide receiver in this matchup at all. I just don't want to touch it, okay? But if Joe Flacco plays, I'll start Michael Pittman with confidence. I'll throw Josh Downs out there as a spot start if I've got some buys or some injuries that I'm dealing with. It completely changes my outlook of this game. And also keeping in mind that the Jags are giving up the 5th most points to fantasy wide receivers right now. So this could be a match made in heaven if we can just get Joe Flacco out there. Hey, Anthony Richardson, come on, man. Just take a week, all right? Get that hip right, feel better. You don't need to rush it. Your job's not in danger, right, guys? Your job's not in danger. Let's just get Joe Flacco out there for at least a game. All right, let's talk Dolphins at Patriots, a divisional game. I don't even know if Dolphins or Patriots fans are excited to watch this game. Are you guys excited to watch this game? It's painful to see right now. Here's the good news. A report just came out before I recorded this that Tua is planning on coming back right after his IR session ends, so he's not going to go beyond that 4 weeks on the IR. He'll be back and ready to go. That will be a huge boost for the Dolphins offense. Tyreek Hill, I would still label a must start. Put together, look, a decent day versus Tennessee. The floor is very, very low, but this is a player that just needs one good pass to pay off his day. We saw him streaking down the field butt-ass naked, and unfortunately Tyler Huntley overthrew him. But he's the type of player that, on literally any touch, he could pay off, playing him in fantasy football. Jalen Waddle, unfortunately, not as built into the script, in my opinion, not someone that I would like to start. We had the same opinion last week. We're not changing it this week. And as far as the Patriots go, I'm not starting any of these names. We shouldn't have this conversation. It's a waste of time. All right, let's talk about Browns at Commanders. Commanders are favored. How about it, baby? How about those Washington Commanders? Jaden Daniels doing his thing, looking like a freaking MVP as a rookie. All right, I'm excited, obviously. I'll calm it down. But what I will say is Terry McLaurin is absolutely in play. Browns are a top 12 matchup for fantasy wide receivers. The weird thing is the Browns have an incredible defense. They've got so many talented names. They've got a great secondary. But at the moment, they are giving up fantasy points to wide receivers. And Terry is on a heater, ladies and gentlemen, averaging 8 targets per game in the last 2 games, a touchdown in both of his last 2 games versus Cincinnati and Arizona. Jaden Daniels is heating up. They're making him a bigger part of this game plan. Terry is definitely a name that you can go out and start this week. Now, as far as Amari Cooper, there might not be a player I'm more excited to play this week than Amari Cooper. The Commanders give up the most points to fantasy wide receivers. And if you look at Amari Cooper's stat last week, you would say he had 7.5 points in fantasy. He had 35 yards. If you only look at the box score, you will miss out on the fact that he burnt a defensive back and was wide open, caught an 82-yard touchdown, but the refs called a BS holding call that was nowhere near worth calling. It shouldn't have been called. And Amari Cooper, in reality, should have had like 23 fantasy points. And that was an 82-yard touchdown that was called back. Point is, he's still an important part of this offense. They're looking for him. He's involved in the red zone. They want to feed him as much as they possibly can. And this is a great matchup for him to get back on track. Jerry Jeudy is definitely a playable option. He's, a desperation play because of the matchup versus the Commanders, but I'm not playing Elijah Moore. All right, this is the start of the afternoon slate of games. We've got 4 games in the afternoon slate. AFC West game, the Raiders at the Broncos. This is tied for the lowest over-under of the week, so we do have to keep that in mind when we're talking about fantasy assets in this game. Let's start with the Raiders side of the ball. Davante Adams, look, if he plays, of course you're going to play him. I can't tell you at this time. The latest report is that his status is unknown. I don't know. Like, if he plays, of course you can play him. We all know that. But what if Davante Adams doesn't play? Do we want to start Jacoby Myers? Do we want to start Trey Tucker? They've been pretty good recently. Jacoby Myers' last game had 10 targets, the week before 9. How about Trey Tucker? Well, Trey Tucker's had over 15 points in the last 2 weeks. Here's the issue. You are now facing the Denver Broncos. The Broncos are one of the worst matchup for fantasy wide receivers, so you have to decide, if it's worth it or not for you. If Davante Adams is out and he's not playing, I would consider starting Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker. They would be in that spot start category for me because ultimately they will be targeted heavily. But if Davante Adams is playing, I don't want a part of those two names. I just don't want to bet on such a low over-under type of game. Now, as far as the Broncos go, I know Courtland Sutton has had 2 weeks over 13 fantasy points. He's averaging 10 targets per game, but he's got maybe some of the worst quarterback play in the NFL right now. So if you're in a deeper format, sure, you can throw him out there, you can play him. But in most of my 12-team leagues, I do not want to start Courtland Sutton. I think you have a better option. I'd say 75% of people have a better option. For example, if Davante Adams is out and I can choose between Jacoby Myers and Courtland Sutton, we'll be going with Jacoby Myers in that format. All right, at number 10, Cardinals at 49ers. This is an NFC West game, and this is the highest over-under of the week, 49.5 points in this game. The Niners are heavy favorites. In fact, they are favored by 7.5 points, but this should be a huge game for fantasy football. I mean, that's what Vegas thinks. We'll see if it pans out that way, but all indications are this could be a massive day. Think Seahawks, Lions, what we just saw on Monday Night Football. That could be this game here in week number 5. So we are absolutely starting Marvin Harrison Jr., has had over 15 points in each of the last 3 games, has scored a touchdown in each of the last 3 games. He looks like an absolute star, and he's just going to keep getting better and better and better. And as far as the 49ers go, I'm personally still going to start Brandon Ayuk. I know it hasn't been good, but unless you have like a clear better option, unless you have like a Deontay Johnson on your team that you just know, oh, I'm going to play him, then I think you should keep starting Brandon Ayuk because I believe this offense is going to figure things out. Also, Deebo Samuel is in play for me. He, in his first game back, played 76% of the snaps. I think he will get more and more involved, and you could even see him in the backfield a little bit because obviously there's no CMC for this team right now. Now, as far as Jauan Jennings, look, this is not a player that I would like to start. I do believe that now that we're another week removed from the Deebo injury, from the Kittle injury, that Jauan Jennings is going to go from the first or second read in this offense all the way down to like the 4th or 5th read in this offense. It's not something that I want to chase, but I understand if you're out there and you're like, look, he's been decent the last couple weeks. I'm just going to keep riding it. Then if you want to do that, do your thing. All right, the 11th matchup we'll look at is the Packers at the Rams. 47.5 point over under. The Packers are favored in SoFi. This should be a very fun game for fantasy football. The 3rd highest over under of the week. Jaden Reed was a superstar in week 1 when Jordan Love was healthy. Then we had to watch Malik Willis play. And then in week 4, Jordan Love is back, healthy again. And again, Jaden Reed, a superstar for fantasy football. In fact, Jaden Reed is averaging about 30 points per game when Jordan Love plays this year. It's absolutely incredible. Top 10 play for me. He has got to be in every single lineup. And then we talk about Dontavion Wicks. Dontavion Wicks will be one of the hottest pickups in fantasy football this week, and I am totally comfortable putting him right into my lineup. This is a guy who last week had 13 targets, caught 2 touchdowns, super athletic, dynamic, can run every single route, talented guy, and had flashes last year without Christian Watson. With no Christian Watson, I'm totally going to put Dontavion Wicks in my roster. You can tell me I'm wrong, but I'm rocking with him. And then look, Dobbs is a fine option if you want to reach deeper into the bag. I just feel like he is not the preferred target in this offense compared to those other 2 names. And it has to be said that this is a pretty damn good matchup. I mean, right now the Rams are giving up the 7th most points to fantasy wide receivers. So this is a good one to chase if you've already picked up Dontavion Wicks. Now, as far as the Rams go themselves, technically this is a good matchup. They're 7th in points allowed, the Packers are. But I view this wide receiver room across the board as desperation play. It's desperation play city. Each and every week, we don't know exactly what's the right name to start here. If I had to choose some names, I'd be choosing Tutu Atwell. I'd be choosing Jordan Whittington. Atwell has had over 12 points in both of the last 2 games. And just last week, Jordan Whittington led this team in snaps, in routes run, in targets. So he's definitely a name that you can put out there as well. All right, moving on to the Giants at the Seahawks. 41.5 point over under. The Seahawks are heavily favored at home. Now, I don't know for sure if Malik Nabers is going to play or not in this game because he obviously dealt with the concussion on Thursday Night Football. But assuming he plays, there's literally no scenario that he's not in your lineup. There is no wide receiver that has scored more fantasy points this year than Malik Nabers. I mean, the guy is on pace to have 200 targets. Of course, you're starting Malik Neighbors. Absolute bona fide superstar. How about Wan'Dale Robinson? He goes in that spot start category for me. He gets fed targets. I've said this before, but he catches it, turns around. He's like, should I try and make someone miss? He can't make anyone miss. He gets tackled, and then you get 1.5 points for that play because he probably got 5 yards. He probably caught the ball. But the fact that he got 14 targets last week and PPR formats finished with 18 points and did such little with the targets that he had means that you can play him. That's just the reality of the situation. He's a floor play. And as far as the Seahawks go, DK Metcalf continues to be an incredible pick in fantasy football. Barely missed out on a touchdown last week versus the Detroit Lions. Could have had an even bigger day. My wide receiver 7 in this game versus the Giants. Remember, we saw Amari Cooper go off this team. We've seen many wide receivers go off versus the New York Giants. So DK Metcalf is a definition of a must start. I definitely think you can start Jackson Smith and Jigba as well, coming off a game where he was targeted 12 times. Let's hope that the Giants keep this a competitive game, because if they don't, then JSN might not be the best start. That's the only reason I'm not as confident in JSN this week as I was last week when we saw he was facing the Detroit Lions. All right, that takes us to Sunday Night Football. We've got the Cowboys at the Steelers, 41.5 point over under. The Steelers are favored at home. And this is two defenses that are not easy matchups for your wide receivers, but you've got on one side with the Cowboys, an absolute superstar in CeeDee Lamb. You've got to start CeeDee Lamb. For most people, this was the 101 or the 102 in your fantasy drafts, and he is slowly but surely starting to pick it up. 23 fantasy points last week versus the Giants. Now he faces a tough defense in the Pittsburgh Steelers, but obviously you're starting a superstar. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS. Start your superstars. Now, as far as George Pickens goes, I'm just not sure when we're going to be excited to start George Pickens. Last week was an incredible matchup. He had 113 yards, but it was a great matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts. Now you face the Cowboys. That secondary is definitely better than the Colts secondary. So lower your expectations, because Justin Fields and this team is just not throwing the ball very much. They did last week because they had to, because they were down the entire game. But what happens if their defense plays well and they're in control of this game? Probably means Pickens is going to be a boom or bust player. We just know that by now. Last thing I'll say for these Cowboy wide receivers, Jake Ferguson has kind of taken over the wide receiver 2 role, if you will, for the Cowboys. He's consistently getting the second most targets behind CeeDee Lamb. So it makes Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert just not playable options for me in fantasy football. All right, the last matchup we'll look at is Monday Night Football. Saints at Chiefs. This should be a fun one, right? 42.5 point over under, and the Chiefs are heavy favorites. Let's start with the Chiefs. If you don't know, notorious Rashee Rice guy right here. He was a my guy for the 2024 season. We had him everywhere. We were starting him. We were feeling so good. We were undefeated in so many leagues. He was carrying us. And unfortunately, Pat Mahomes decided to dolphin dive straight into his knee. And we have no idea at the time of recording how long he'll miss. It might be the entire year. It just makes these videos a little more bleak because I don't get to talk about Rashee Rice. But let's talk about Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy becomes not a must start. He stays in that spot start range. Just quite frankly, I don't think that because Rashee Rice is out, it means Xavier Worthy is going to get a bunch of more opportunities. I mean, last week he had 4 targets. That's around what he's had in every single game so far. And last week there was no Rashee Rice. And they asked Andy Reid, they said, hey, Andy, now that there's no Rashee Rice, will we have more Xavier Worthy in the game plan? And Andy basically says, maybe. It's not our focus, but maybe. So that just sounds like a guy that wants to get Xavier Worthy the ball 4 or 5 times a game, scheme it up, but certainly not someone that he wants to funnel the offense through. I believe this offense completely reverts back to what it was last year to begin the season, which was let's target Travis Kelce every time that we can. And then at the end of the day, all these other wide receivers are going to contribute in small little ways. Now, as far as the Saints go, you're definitely starting Chris Olave coming off 2 very good games, 86 yards in week number 3 and 87 yards in week number 4. He is a definition of a must start. Great bounce back recently. And then Rashid Shaheed, I'm not going to lie, 11 targets last week. That definitely made my head turn. If we can start to see Rashid Shaheed get consistent targets like that, he will be a much more intriguing option. I'm labeling him a I'm labeling him a spot start, but if you're in a deeper format, I totally think you can throw him out there because let's be honest, the Chiefs are probably going to try and shut down Chris Olave, which means it could be a big Rashid Shaheed week. But you got to know there is that boom bust ceiling with a guy like Rashid Shaheed. You just have to be aware of that when you put him into your lineup. So that is it for today. I appreciate you guys watching. Do me a favor, hit that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. And the last thing I'll say is if you have a start sit question, a trade question, whatever the case may be, check out the pinned comment. There's a link to our website where you can ask me a question at any time. And also, if you don't have an account over on the Flock site, use the promo code LAND, L-A-N-D. You'll get a 7-day free trial. When using the code, you'll get access to expert rankings, the trade calculator, the league analyzer, and of course, you'll get discounts off of asking questions in the a la carte page. I appreciate you for watching. See you soon. Go get a win in week number 5. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.